Are you ready, black people? Are you really ready? Are you ready to listen to all the beautiful black voices, the beautiful black feeling, the beautiful black waves moving in beautiful air? Are you ready, black people? Are you ready?
Nobody ever heard of the Harlem Cultural Festival. Nobody would believe it happened.
6 weekends of major artists.
The Panthers were the security and kids were sitting up on the trees.
I was nervous. I didn't expect a crowd like that. Something very important was happening. It wasn't just about the music.
1969 was a change of era in the black community.
The styles were changing.
Music was changing.
And revolution was coming together.
We are a new people. We are a beautiful people.
That concert took my life from black and white into color.
We wanted progress. We are black people, and we should be proud of this.
We were coming together to say this was our world and how beautiful it was.
We're gonna try to sing a song together. Don't wait for your neighbor, because your neighbor might be waiting for you.
Wanna take you higher? Are you ready? Wanna take you higher?
We believed in what we felt in here. So when we went up, let's go do it.
Thank you, Landis. I don't know about all of you, but that film was really incredible. I'm smiling just looking at the video that was shown. But good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the HBCUs, the Black Film Experience, featuring Summer of Soul. I'm Tammy Jones, and I'm chair of the Essex County chapter in New Jersey of the Links Incorporated. I would like to recognize our president, Dr. Karma Warren, and the HBCU committee of ladies who helped to bring this program to you. So why the Black Film Experience? Well, in April of 2021, we introduced a documentary, Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, to our HBCUs. We are building on that and want to create a film experience for you. There are stories through this medium, stories of perhaps your relatives or friends, but what's so important is that these stories be preserved and not be forgotten. Summer of Soul is the right mix of entertainment, history, culture, politics, and most importantly, it's about us. We almost didn't know about this important 6 weeks of our history, but thanks to the persistence of a few, that these positive images of our people are brought to life to be preserved permanently. You are in for a treat today. We have professors from 7 HBCUs who will recount the discussion had in their classrooms about Summer of Soul. Our facilitator for the day is Professor Willie Moore, endowed professor creative at Hampton University. We have some videos to share with you, and you will get a chance to submit questions on the chat. So let's get this going. Professor Moore, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Summer of Soul. What we're going to do first is we try to give each professor 5 minutes so that we can get a chance to hear everyone. And once again, I'm from Hampton University, Scripps Howard, and I teach a lot of the, as the kids call it, cool stuff. Teach a lot of 3D, 2D animation, principles of advertising, and all those cool classes. So without further ado, I would like to, if it's all right with you, if we go ahead and start into each professor. So the first professor that's up on the screen is Dr. Spears, and from Cheney. And so we were going to go ahead and start. Dr. Spears.
All right, that would be my pleasure. Thank you so much, Dr. Moore and Ms. Jones and all my esteemed colleagues for holding this. It's such a pleasure to participate in such a discussion about such a valuable piece of work of art and more, as a matter of fact. We showed it on a Wednesday of 2 weeks ago, I believe, in an open forum. The film, we had not exactly the highest participation there, age of COVID, but the students did watch it on Hulu as suggested. And we've had numerous discussions in class and a Thursday forum after the initial viewing. So we had a chance to discuss all the questions, but my question that I asked students specifically to respond to was the first one. And that was, it was believed by some that Black America lost faith in this country. They had seen too many of their leaders jailed or killed. JFK in 63, Malcolm in 65, MLK 68, Kennedy in 68. The Vietnam War had a disproportionate effect on Black men on the front line, more deaths. How did music help them cope mentally and emotionally? Is what my students responded to specifically. And I had mostly freshmen because I am the director of the freshman seminar and just one sophomore. But this freshman, and I was delighted that their comments were on point, in my opinion. Black people had very little giving them hope. They found hope in music. Music made them feel strong and confident in themselves. It often referred to the shared religion of most Black people. And making that connection, which will be made again. Another student, Rakaya, that first one is Imani, Rakaya said African Americans took to the streets to protest and riot. They burned down buildings and many people were arrested. To distract them from what was going on and take people off the street, a series of 6 free musical festivals called the Harlem Cultural Festival was organized. And I do believe that is correct. She said, as a distraction, music gave African Americans a voice. They sang songs of freedom, which gave them a sense of unity. The Harlem Cultural Festival was a way for Black people to let their guard down, a safe space for them to let out all their emotional and mental distress, especially at a time like that. Elisa Treese said, this helped Black men on the front line with a joyful Black cultural and musical experience to help them keep going. Sophie said, people didn't want any more African Americans burning up the cities in 1969. And this was true, actually. Anger and rage when King had gotten shot, riots had unleashed. She says, I think the festival helped them cope mentally by making sure the music can help them think not about what happened, but rather enjoy how the Black community is all coming together for the festival. It was something that made Black people feel safe and able to express themselves. Cameron, the sophomore, goes on and says, people cope differently by reading, exercising, etc. Music in general is a universal tool. It can be used in any situation. Music helps because music is the only thing that will not turn you down. Music helps people cope mentally and emotionally because it talks to you in ways that other people cannot. And then from freshman Solomon, footage from the actual festival depicted no hate, opposition, violence whatsoever. All you could see were clouds of Black people in harmony, listening to and enjoying Black music. Music allowed Black people to join together, set down troubles they were facing no matter how big, and be at peace. Music for Black America was also a form of expression that could be a tool when used the right way. Meaningful lyrics harmonized with soulful voices and allowed Black people to liberate themselves from their oppressors and send a message to all corners of the world. Music provided Black people with a voice they thought was lost when leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were killed. Morgan, the freshman, follows up with gospel music and other genres were forms of expression about how the community felt about what was going on. And I think we saw that in the film. Nadia refers back to Barbara Bland Acosta, who was in high school and heard about the festival. And she said she was so excited, she felt crazy about what happened in 1968. And we needed that, is what she said. And then Nadia finishes up by saying, gospel was a part of Black people's history, freedom, and DNA, as Charlene Hulter-Galt stated. Al Sharpton expresses this: gospel was more than religious, it was therapy for the stress and pressure of being Black in America. He said how Black people didn't know anything about therapy or psychiatrists, but they did know about Mahalia Jackson, who who was a gospel singer with such a beautiful sound that touched the hearts of many. All in all, Nadia says, music helped Black people cope with the loss of their leaders. Black music is Black history. And I would agree with all this. Mahalia Jackson was Black history. Mahalia was the Beyonce of her day, different indeed, but she, like Beyonce, was powerful and compelling across all racial lines. We remember when James Brown had to go to neighborhoods and say, be cool, to keep the riots from exploding. Since 1619, at least, music has indeed been a way to keep our sanity and push on. The Harlem Music and Cultural Festival is a shining example of that, and it does certainly capture the joy of being Black. So that's the last part is my opinion, but that's what my students had to say about this phenomenal film. So it's been my pleasure to share that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Spears. I forgot to mention that the category, but at the beginning, in terms of the category, it's not set in stone. So as Tammy was saying, that you might be able to work around other stuff while you were talking about your section. The next person I would like to introduce is Dr. Thompson from Howard University.
Okay, so Howard is not going to be on today. That was the one school that said they couldn't make it. So we can go to Delaware State.
Okay, so we can go on to Professor Denson at Delaware State.
Thank you.
Hello, yes, can you all hear me? Yes, okay, good.
Yes.
This is my first time testing out the mic for this session. I'd like to thank Tammy. I appreciate the invite initially on speaking on this topic. So I thank our host for this evening. I appreciate it. I am Marty Denson. I am representing Delaware State University. And the classes that I introduced the film to were my Introduction to Music Technology class and my Popular Music Ensemble class. So I am working with a collective group of students who are in the music industry, if you will, or in the music major, specifically majoring in music industry here at the university. And the topic was a confusing one initially when I introduced it to them, where they thought it was more approach to just the film itself. But as we got to the discussion of the film initially, this was actually before anyone watched the film. And my classes are only once per week, so I did not have an opportunity to talk to the class collectively, but I was able to speak to students in pockets throughout the week about the film, and just to kind of get their input and their feedback on what they saw and what they thought. And it was quite interesting when we started to get into some discussions of that. Being a musician myself, going back in the day, I thought every aspect of that film was quite compelling. Everything from the musicianship to the actual storyline within the film, which in my opinion was even more compelling when you start to understand the direction that the filmmaker was actually leading us in. But to be more specific, with a few of the students that I talked to as it relates to the musical component, I think what some of them found interesting and what was stated was that they recognized music that they weren't familiar with throughout the film, meaning that they saw that it was not just our typical soul type of music that was being put on display on the stage, that there were a variety of forms, variety of style, a variety of musicians with all types of backgrounds and all types of music that represented all genres. And the question arose by one of my students, well, I thought it was supposed to be like all Black music. And I said, and I tried to give them some context that you have to understand in this day or in that day and time, what was happening. And in order to make political statements to a group of people in a specific area, you have to find a way to bridge that gap between those political commentaries with those people in that area or that particular section of New York where they were and try to get a mindset that is uniform. And in order to do that, that's where music comes in. Music plays an important role in bridging the gap of bringing people together of all cultures and background. And so as I started to explain these concepts, I could see the wheels starting to churn in many of those students that I did talk to. And they sense, as one student said, I guess they were trying to get a message out. Absolutely. And in this forum, trying to get that message out in a political sense, this was the best way to do it. And it makes sense to them, obviously, because this is how we do it. When we perform here at the university, we try to get a message out in our performances. But I think one of the most compelling things, along with the storyline for a few of the students in my classes, was that they were able to see some of the most talented musicians, vocalists that were around at that time. In fact, many of those musicians were musicians that they actually idolized, such as Stevie Wonder, Fifth Dimension, believe it or not. I have a lot of freshmen in my classes, so I was kind of surprised that they even recognized some of those individuals, but they did recognize those individuals, and they thought it was quite interesting how it was a free concert and that they had actually never heard of this concept of the Harlem Cultural Festival that took place over several days. And I went into further explanation and making sure they understood what was happening, not just with the music, but what was happening with the transition at that specific time in America with communities and with Black people to that regard. And I think when I kind of threw that enlightenment on them, they suddenly realized that, so that is where we have the consciousness of thinking that we have today that we are seeing in so many other areas in America now. And the discussion then led to, as you can see, when a group of people have gotten to the point now where they feel they need to wake up and become conscious of how we have been treated and how we have been dealt with over several years, it becomes a significant impact in the change of their mentalities. And they drew a connection with that in what we have been seeing in the culture in recent years with a lot of the incidents with police shootings and things of that nature. And they drew the connection in some of the riots that took place during that time and compared it to the outrage that was taking place in some of the incidents with like the George Floyd incident and others, obviously, that we are aware of. And they began to recognize that 1969 was a very powerful year that perhaps they had never even considered before. And I still have a lot of students that are hopefully here today and are getting a glimpse of what we're talking about. And we'll go ahead and follow up and watch the film. I thought it was very compelling from all aspects, but the one that I pointed out was the storyline and obviously the musicianship and the level of talent and skill that was on stage, along with the political leaders that were there to help guide this change of consciousness, if you will. So that is as far as our discussions went. It was very enlightening, and I'm hoping we can continue this talk with my classes in the upcoming weeks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Denson.
Thank you.
We move over to a category of culture, and that category we're going to start with Dr. Gooding at UMES, University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. Dr. Gooding.
Hi, thank you so much. Tammy, I am so excited to be a part of this project, and I just thank you so much for including us. I will start off by saying that when I was approached about this, I thought, okay, well, I hadn't heard of this, and so let me check this out. And so we started watching it on a Saturday morning. I just put it on with my coffee and my breakfast. My family's gathered around, and my little children they're doing their own thing, and then they started watching. And then my husband came in and he started watching, and it just became, everybody was just enraptured in this story. Well, immediately, then we started talking about it. And that was what was replicated in the classroom. And it was just such a really, just a moment of joy and a great moment of conversation that really intersected with a lot of the other things that we're talking about and exploring. So I showed this in my Afrofuturism class, and some of the other faculty members came and visited who are in digital media studies. And so we watched half of it. We didn't have time to watch it in its entirety, but it was enough that students did go back and finish it on their own. And then we came back and talked about it. And the question that I had for them was, how significant was the presence of Sly and the Family Stone as it relates to gender parity, integration of bands, and unique style? What was his message? And so we talked a lot about how this idea of music as a way forward. And one of the topics that comes up in the film is that music is sort of this common denominator. And I think it was Marilyn McCoo that said, how do you color a sound? And that idea of how do you delineate? But we talked about the reception of Sly and the Family Stone, and how there was like, wait a minute, why is this woman playing a trumpet, and why is this white guy on the drums? But what we really discussed was how music was a way to, or can be a way to enact protest in a way that is more palatable, maybe, for the mainstream, but also as a way to discuss form and function. So you've got a band, you've got a group that's talking, that's integrating, and then singing things like Simple Song or Everyday People, and talking about this urgency and this need to just be welcoming and coming together. And then we look at the idea of the music and the joy and the makeup of the band, and how that form sort of follows the function. And so it was really an important conversation, because it was a way for us to then launch into, well, where do we see music today as piloting change? And so it was really interesting, because they were able to look at and then share with their own parents. Several of them went home and talked about this with their families and shared it. And I always love those learning opportunities, because then they can talk about their families who maybe grew up with this music. And so we talked a lot about how this looking back and the use of gospel music and gospel sound came up to this sort of I think they were talking about this idea of transformative cool. And that idea of building bridges, breaking those binaries, breaking those boundaries, which is something that we talked a lot about in Afrofuturism, the past and the future, and merging the sounds, and merging these what we like to see as divides. But what happens when it all comes together? And more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, but equally important, is that idea of Sly sort of preaching that ministry of fun and that joy. That was something else that we talked about, is just how refreshing it is to see celebration and joy and a coming together. And again, as was said before, many students didn't necessarily know the artist, but some of them knew the songs, and several of us were singing along and as we were watching it. So I think that's important, and it fed into some of the other projects that we're doing. We're talking about one of our common readers this year in Maryland is the Book of Delights by Ross Gay, and just celebrating and joy and really focusing on that. And that was really something that they took from it.
Thank you, Dr. Gooding.
Thank you.
Moving on in the cultural category, I have my colleague across the street, Dr. Balls in Hampton University.
Hello, you can't hear me, I hope.
I can, yeah.
Great. Yeah, I when I was approached to participate, I was told that it would probably be ideal for the two classes that I'm teaching this semester that are in our film studies section of our English department. So we watched it in those two classes. One is Intro to Motion Pictures, and the other is Film Criticism. Those two classes really have a goal of teaching students to, quote unquote, read a film. They approach film as a type of language system, if you will, for lack of a better way of putting it. And we go through the process of breaking down films. We look at script, we look at direction, we look at production design, cinematography, the use of sound, and how things are edited. Both of those courses primarily deal with narrative fiction. So this gave us an opportunity to delve into nonfiction, to delve into documentary. And one of the things that was really, I guess, important, or that we made a point, or I made a point to emphasize, is that those same elements, such as having an inciting incident, having plot points, having a particular kind of narrative structure, are just as important in documentary as they are in narrative fiction. And so dialogue and discourse about those things started to take place. And one of the things that I think stuck out was that the film had sat for so long. Prior to showing the film, I gave a brief overview of how the film was shot at the same time as Woodstock, and it sat for years before being completed. And that led to us, again, applying we talked about narrative structure and whatnot. How do you take this film and shape it into something that becomes a story? And so discussions surrounded the creative arrangement of factual material, which is really the essence of what documentary is. And we talked about how Questlove got involved. I threw out When We Were Kings. Both films are similar. When We Were Kings was the documentary about the rumble in the jungle between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. And the filmmaker, it took over 20 years to actually complete the film. 22 years, I'm cheating, I'm looking. The film sat for that long. And ultimately, the film ended up winning the Academy Award for Best Documentary. Hopefully this film does the same kind of thing. We talked about how it becomes incumbent upon the filmmaker to find that structure, to create the plot, the inciting incident, to find the plot point, to structure the material. How does that happen? Obviously, in this film, the interviews serve as a great way to structure the film. Musa Jackson was phenomenal. He opens the film and he closes the film. And through the interviews, which were in many instances shot years later, they were able to find a structure. So that was a bulk of the discussion. When I was told that we would have to talk about culture, and I asked students to give me feedback, when most of them would send me, would upload their comments on Blackboard, a lot of what they were fascinated by were things such as the hairstyles, the clothing, how eccentric people seem and carefree. All of the things that cinema has a power to do. And we talked about what does that mean? What is culture and what does that mean? And how do you feel? The visceral connection to the film as an artifact, as a document, was something that really jumped out for me. I went ahead and did my own homework, and just to reinforce what culture is. You know, I took a quote from Walter Rodney. He says, the great Black historian and academic, he said that culture is a way of life. It enables what people ate. It embodies what people ate, what they wore, how they walk, how they talk, the manner in which they treat death, and in which they greet a newborn. And so we talked about it within this context of what is it as a cultural thing, as a cultural artifact, as a cultural document, if you will, because a documentary essentially is a document. And nobody lamented the fact that it sat. I think they marveled at it. But at the end of the film, there's an ethos, or there's a general sentiment of sadness, and it doesn't close with that sadness. But at the end of that confrontation, as you go into the resolution, there's a hint of sadness around the fact that the film sat for so long, and there's also a sentiment that says that they didn't recognize us. It's tragedy that we didn't have this film completed in so long. And I wanted to convey to the students, and maybe I'm wrong, but I didn't see that it was sad at all. Sure, obviously there's something not so great about the fact that the film sat for so long, but as a cultural document, it'll go on in perpetuity, if you will. And I didn't really feel a sense of negativity around, quote unquote, they not recognizing it. Because if one thing that the film does at its best is it shows this spirit of agency that Black people had in the wake of Martin Luther King's death and all of that which had transpired over that decade of the 60s. Here we are in 1969, and people were still strutting and proud. And Nina Simone talked about, "Are you ready?" And so I really, really, really culturally thought that it was something other than negative. I didn't really care for the fact that there was that hint of sadness. But Musa Jackson at the end says, "I know I'm not crazy." And it was beautiful that time. And so while he's somewhat lamenting it, the fact that the film had come out is celebratory. We were able to enjoy some of that. So as a cultural document, hopefully they'll go back to it. Hopefully they learn something from it. That's what documentary does at its best, is it teaches, it provides a document. But we also used it as a tool to discuss those things within not only the context of film, but within the text of film. We looked at the cinematography. We looked at the color. We looked at how interviews were shot. We looked at the structure. And we really enjoyed it. It was a great teaching tool.
Professor Moore, if I could interrupt here for a second. Yeah. I have so enjoyed the feedback that we've heard so far. The students' feedback, and led by the professors with asking the questions, has just been so insightful. And I agree with you, Dr. Balls, that I thought that it was very enlightening. And I think that so many things could have been put out there negative about our culture. And, you know, this was supposed to have been sold 50 years ago, and no one wanted to take it and publish it. But the fact, yes, it is 50 years later, but I thought it was very enlightening and uplifting, and seeing us in a positive way, instead of maybe the way people of other races viewed us. So I just thought it was really wonderful. And from all of the speakers that have given the feedback so far, I just applaud you for what you've done, and just open up the minds. And I can see by the feedback that your students have really been engaged and have really enjoyed it.
And if I could piggyback off of that, yes. Just that had it been compromised, had it come out upon it being shot and compromised, it would have undermined the spirit of it. It came out late, but I think it came out in such a way that it spoke to the political and cultural realities in ways that are authentic and uplifting. And,
and I just want to ask one thing from a technical standpoint. Are we being recorded, Landis? I just want to make sure. And if you can also turn on the closed captioning, we've had a couple of questions in there several times.
The closed captioning has been activated. I don't know why they're not seeing it, and yes, the recording is on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks again, Dr. Balls. And we have one more speaker with the cultural section, and then Landis is going to play another clip. And so the next professor up is Dr. Matson from Cheney University. I don't see your name, but are you out there?
Dr. Matson?
Yes.
She's not on.
So you want to go ahead and play the clip, and then we come back and maybe see what happens?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew to eat hog maws confiscated from a Harlem sanctuary. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by the Schaefer Award Theater and will not star Natalie Woods and Steve McQueen or Bullwinkle and Julia. The revolution will not give your mouth sex appeal. The revolution will not get rid of the nub. The revolution will not make you look 5 pounds thinner because the revolution will not be televised, brother. There will be no pictures of you and Willie Mae pushing that shopping cart down the block on the dead run or trying to slide that color TV into a stolen ambulance. NBC will not be able to predict the winner at 8:32 on report from 29 districts. The revolution will not be televised. There will be no pictures of pigs shooting down brothers on the instant replay. There will be no pictures of pigs shooting down brothers on the instant replay. There will be no pictures of Whitney Young being run out of Harlem on a rail with a brand new process. There will be no slow motion or still life of Roy Wilkins strolling through Watts in a red, black, and green liberation jumpsuit that he has been saving for just the proper occasion. Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, and Hooterville Junction will no longer be so damn relevant, and women will not care if Dick finally got down with Jane on Search for Tomorrow, because black people will be in the street looking for a brighter day. The revolution will not be televised. There will be no highlights on the 11 o'clock news and no pictures of Harry armed women liberationists and Jackie Onassis blowing her nose. The theme song will not be written by Jim Webb or Francis Scott Keys, nor sung by Glenn Campbell, Tom Jones, Johnny Cash, Engelbert Humperdinck, or The Rare Earth. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be right back after a message about a white tornado, white lightning, or white people. You will not have to worry about a dove in your bedroom, the tiger in your tank, or the giant in your toilet bowl. The revolution will not go better with coke. The revolution will not fight germs that may cause bad breath. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution will be live.
Thank you, Landis. looking at that clip remind me of my colleague. I don't know how much you are familiar with Professor Earl Caldwell, but he is known for the Caldwell versus the Supreme Court, which is basically fighting to never give up his information as a journalist. Mm-hmm. And he is up there in the ages, but he reminds you all the time that you're probably familiar with him being the only Black journalist around Martin Luther King assassination, and he followed the Black Panther Party. The FBI tried to get his information. He wouldn't give it up. And he was working for the Times, New York Times, and the New York Times put him on another assignment. So they had him follow the Black Panthers during that period. So that's what this really reminded me. And I thought it'd be good to share with you all that he's still alive and he's down here teaching just like I am.
Wow, that's really good feedback. And I know you have plenty of stories like that. And if I could just interject one thing too, it's one assignment, so to speak. The professor wasn't able to come, but I don't know if you want to speak to this, Professor Moore, or someone else. Why was Nina Simone's voice so powerful? What messages did she convey? What was the infamous song that spoke to Black pride? So I just wanted to throw that out there to kind of shake it up a little bit.
Okay.
Anybody can address that if you want to.
Oh, I would love to address that.
Yes. Okay.
They saved the best. Well, they saved the incendiary part until the end. And her message, that poem that she chose to read, was in fact a call to arms, something to think about. That in fact, Black leaders, burn baby burn. Many Black leaders had said, maybe we need to. It was hearkening back to the slave revolts of Nate Turner and Prosser and all that. It's definitely food for thought. And so I'm just going to leave it there and let my colleagues join in. But I thought it was very powerful and very thought-provoking.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I thought it was very powerful when Nina Simone spoke. And I think I saw it in the chat discussion where someone said they were kind of impressed with the one statement, were we ready? And it was one of those questions that I don't think many of the crowd actually understood what she was asking at that particular time, because I think she understood what was really about to happen from that point moving forward. And I thought just because of the nature of, first of all, her artistry, her musical ability, and just the nature of her to command an audience and in speaking, that she knew and she was prepared for consciously what this entire festival was representing and what direction it was going to be moving us in as a people, and how we would perform, if you will, with our thought process moving forward. So I thought, yeah, she was the perfect person to get up there and make such a statement and ask such a bold question.
Thank you for your feedback, both of you.
Anyone else have any?
Yeah, I'd like to add, when Nina Simone, and I don't want to undermine the power of what she's saying, but there was a quote, again, I go back to Musa Jackson. He, on the images where Nina Simone is wrapping up, he says something along the lines of, the concert was like nothing he had ever seen in his life. And just the visceral response that I had to seeing Nina Simone in this beautiful outfit with her hair, her natural hair. And he says something along the lines of, before that, the world was like in black and white. And then they cut to this panoramic shot of the entire crowd. And he says, that concert took my life into color. Mm. And it was just one of those brief, sublime moments where cinema really, really can convey something through something visceral through images that really work. I thought that that piece of filmmaking and editing right there was just magnificent.
Okay. Anyone? We got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to move on to the next category, which is the political and business. And the first professor in there is Professor Baskin at Simmons College of Kentucky.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. It's my pleasure to participate in this discussion, and especially as a representative of Simmons College of Kentucky, which is the Commonwealth of Kentucky's only private HBCU, and I think is one of the newest HBCUs in the country. The way I'm gonna focus upon or deal with this topic is to deal with it from a viewpoint of being a historian. And that is to use my life as an example as what was going on in 1969. And if many of the panelists, if you're about 70 years old, as I am, you may have had some of the same common experiences that I did. From 1st to the 10th grade, I attended all-Black Charles M. Hall High School in Alcoa, Tennessee. And Hall School was located in the heart of the Black community. In 1968, the Board of Education of the city of Alcoa decided to close Hall, and I had to attend along with other members of my class. We had to attend the predominantly white Alcoa High School, which I graduated from in 1969. 1969 then was the year that I left the segregated Black community that residents of Alcoa even now call the 13th Streets. These residents were descendants of the migrants from the Black Belt described by Isabel Wilkerson in The Warmth of Other Suns. My relatives, for example, were from Bullock County, Alabama, which is definitely in the Black Belt. The county seat would be Union Springs. They had moved to Alcoa, and some of them had moved to Oak Ridge to pursue more opportunities. And the ones who moved to Alcoa pursued the opportunities by working for the Aluminum Company of America. Even though they found out, even though they had more opportunities in Alcoa, they still faced discrimination and racism. It followed them from Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, wherever they came from, to Tennessee. 1969 was the year that I became the first person in my immediate family to have the opportunity to go to college. And as I was thinking earlier today, I was probably the first who had the opportunity to finish high school. So I will leave in May of 1969 to head north to a faraway place called the Commonwealth of Kentucky, to a little school called Berea College. This was the first time that I had to live with a non-family member, and not to mention at Berea, my first college roommate was a white boy from rural Indiana. So it would be the first time that I had to live with someone white. 1969 was also the year that I stopped getting a haircut for a few years. It used to be every Saturday morning, you would know where I would be. And every Saturday morning before I went away to college, I would be at the barbershop of Mr. Bill Boyd in Maryville, Tennessee. I stopped getting a haircut when I went to Berea because, like so many of us, we decided we were going to try and grow afros. And when I went to Mr. Boyd's barbershop in Maryville, this is where I learned from the elders. I listened to the older Black men discuss race, politics, and of course, women and their relationships. In 1969, these barbershop sessions were replaced by conversations with members of my college community. The demographics of the audience then will be different, but the topics were still the same. 1969 was the year, as was stated in the film, that I was free of the rules of my family. I now had freedom not to go to church. I had freedom to correct my elders and not get hit in the mouth. I had freedom to drink, to smoke. Yes, please hold your ears, to fornicate, and to not have a curfew. Eventually, I learned the peaks and the valleys of freedom. Years later, I will incorporate many of my parents' rules in raising my own children and teaching my students at 3 different colleges. 1969, as was discussed in the film, was the year that I sat with my classmates in Barrett Lounge at Berea College and watched the moon landing with other Berea College students. Even to this day, when I think of my mother and I think about a man walking on the moon, I can hear her conversation. Till the day she died, she never believed and never would be convinced that anyone landed and walked on the moon. In her way of thinking, if God had wanted people on the moon, he would have placed them there. 1969 was the year that I learned that a college education could open many doors, but not all of them. I would still have to learn how to navigate a predominantly white world as a Black man with a degree. Even today, no matter how many awards and honors I receive, society still tries to treat me and other African Americans as second-class citizens. 1969 was the year when I began my evolution from being a colored boy, and when I was growing up, colored was the accepted term. From being a colored boy to becoming a Black, Afro-American, or African-American man who understood my responsibilities and obligations to my village. In 1969, I may not have known about the Harlem Cultural Festival. And I'll be honest, I had not known about it until a few months ago when I read about the Summer of Soul. And this weekend, I had the opportunity to watch the film. But even though I may not have known about the Harlem Cultural Festival until I watched the Summer of Soul, I will always know that 1969 was one of the most crucial and important years in my life. Mm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baskin. Next, we have Professor Hyatt from Coppin State. And I'm looking at the headline over, and you was mentioning about culture and politics. So I just want to mention.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be amongst all of you for this discussion. And I'm so grateful that this film was brought into my life and the life of my students. Let me say that I am Gary Hyatt. I'm over the visual and performing arts area at Coppin State University, Baltimore, Maryland. And I have to tell you that we had 4 classes that participated in the viewing of this film. I teach 2 public speaking classes amongst my course load, intro to speech communication. Both of my classes watched it. There's another class that I team teach called Visual Art and Theater. They watched the film. And there's a 4th class called Intercultural Communication that also viewed the film. And so the professors from these classes got together and we said we needed a common instrument to be able to evaluate it across our classes. So what we came up with was a 20-question survey to give out to the students in the classes. And what I'd like to do, a little different from what we've already heard, is share some of the responses from the surveys. Okay, and we asked questions like, what was their favorite performance? Do you like documentaries? Would you watch other documentaries? How would you rate this one? Was it worthy of an Academy Award? All these kinds of questions. So there were 20 questions, and I'm just going to share 7 reactions from the responses that I received across a couple of the classes. The favorite performance was very interesting. It was number 1 was Mahalia Jackson, and number 2 was David Ruffin. The favorite moment, nobody in any of the classes that we had ever heard of the Fifth Dimension, but they all felt that the Fifth Dimension's story, I should say Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis's story about how they came to record Aquarius and Let the Sun Shine In with him losing his wallet and all of that was just fascinating. And they thought it was such a great song. And by the way, the persons in my speech class are mostly freshmen and sophomore. So this was only the second documentary many of them had seen. I asked them if they had seen any other documentaries. The only other one they said they saw Coachella with Beyonce. That was it. Okay. I asked them the greatest thing they learned from watching the movie. And they thought that it was so true what they say about the power of music to bring people together. I thought that was a great statement. Another class talked about how amazed they were at how about the history, how the history element was incorporated in this film to really teach about what was going on at that time. We also asked, what was the biggest surprise in the movie? And one student said this, and everybody seconded, that the variety of genres of music that were evident in this. Another student said, if you go to a concert today, you're going to a hip hop concert, you're only going to see hip hop artists. If you go to a gospel concert, you're only going to see gospel concert artists, right? That you're not going to see this mix. And they marveled at the fact that Willie Tyler and Lester, they had comedians on this show too as well, right? So they thought that was interesting. The other reaction that I thought was very, very interesting was, they said they did not know anything about Questlove's efforts to bring this film to fruition, and they were surprised that the length of how it had sat aside and why it was never released before now. And several of them who have only seen 1 or 2 documentaries said that they definitely would like to see more, that they learned a lot from this. And that they said they probably would not have watched it if it was not a class project, but they're glad that they did because they learned something that they did not know. I asked them their emotional moment from the movie, and it came back to the Fifth Dimension, the dimension of, the layer of persons who actually performed in the original concert. Watching it 50, 60 years later was really quite emotional for them. They thought that was just a great emotional moment. And because my area is the theater, I thought that this was an outstanding document of storytelling. The history, the reactions from the performers. I really appreciated how Questlove took this concert footage and layered the history and the reactions and the interviews. I loved how all of that came together. And all of my class all said that this was very much worthy of Academy Award consideration. And it makes me think. I have to close with one of my favorite quotes by Ozzie Davis, that Any form of art is a form of power. It has impact and it can affect change. It can not only move us, it makes us move. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Professor Hyatt. Moving on down the line. Next, we have Dr. Lanos at Norfolk State. Are you? I don't see the name, so let me check. Dr. Lanos around?
Lenore,
there you are. There you are.
So I'm a historian, and so the conversation. So this was it's foreshadowing what we will be talking about, as opposed to them already having read and being prepared. But if you can't tell from my accent, I'm from the Deep South, right? And don't laugh too hard, right? But I'm from the deep South. And so one of the things that I study is African Americans in the South historically, and Memphis and its pivotal role was one of the things that I wanted to highlight with my students. And because the Church of God in Christ comes up in a couple of places, right? I grew up in the Church of God in Christ, and its headquarters, its international headquarters are in Memphis, and this is where Martin Luther King Jr. gives his last speech, and Pentecostal and these other kind of connections. And so this is one of those foreshadowing things that we will be talking about in the class, is this coming out of the veins of music, blues, jazz, gospel, all of what those roots and stuff are, and how they're going to be transformed over time, and what that meaning is. Another highlight that, and so of course, Jesse Jackson is talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and what's going on in Memphis. The saxophonist from Memphis, I think it was Bernard. And so we talk about the pivotal role that Memphis has, and that history is not talked about as much. But anyhow, the other historical piece that's really important to me that I wanted to highlight with the students was the transition of what Negro and Black meant. And this transition, and then there's the other thing that's associated with it, and it goes to something that Jesse Jackson said as well, was that, because we're in this moment today, and one of the things I try to do with my history class is, and I'm teaching African American history since enslavement, and so one of the things I try to highlight is things that's going on today. And so there is a movement. I don't know if anybody's on Clubhouse, but on Clubhouse is where I learned about it, but the American descendants of slavery and their ideology surrounding Pan-Africanism and Black people who are not from the United States. And they have this very interesting argument, and I don't want to shade anybody's thinking. And so I think it's ADOS 101 if you want to learn more about them. And so, so Jesse Jackson brings up in his transitional from Negro to Black that, that Blackness, according to him, they're not Africans, they're not Europeans, they're not Asians, right? He said this earlier in the film. And then when they start talking about this transition from Negro to Black and how empowering that was, that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight, because we see this transition for color as well, Afro-American, these other to African-American, to where we are now. And so that was another historical highlight that I wanted to hammer in on how the times fit or change for the identity and what those names mean for the people who take it on. And the last piece that I would say was the journalist who was working for the New York Times, who had to fight to be able to use Black instead of Negro, and having her stuff edited. And then the last piece, of course, is the historical time. And so I'm gonna have my students watch it again, and I'm going to have them watch it watch this first and then watch the most recent Fred Hampton movie that just came out, because he's going to die in December of 1969. And so for us to be able to travel through 1969 and this historical moment of Black radicalism that is shifting away from this nonviolence, and for it to be moving towards this mainstream, towards a fight for literally a fight for African American rights. And so those were the three main ideas that I wanted them to be thinking about historically as we work our way towards the 1960s.
Thank you, Dr. Lannis. Next, while this is still hot, let's move on to Professor Holloway and at Delaware State.
Thank you.
Early. Okay.
Yep, thank you. I am Professor Holloway at Delaware State, and we watched this in my American history. I do teach African American history, but I teach the first part, so I didn't think it fit fairly well just yet in that class. So we did American history. And one of the things I definitely pointed out and we talked about, and just as the last professor was talking about, this is almost a foreshadow because we're not there yet in the 1960s as it relates to what we're studying thus far. But what I wanted them to truly understand historically, there is no other place that this could happen, right? Because when you historically think about, we talked about historically, what does Harlem mean to America, right? We talk about the 1920s, you get one of the greatest literary movements out of the Harlem Renaissance. So you get, literature and English and culture in that aspect. You have the jazz movement that also comes out of Harlem in the 1920s. So it's such a cultural epicenter for African Americans or Black America, as we will see. And then, I also connected, historically understanding music. So we were able to look at music not only as a cultural aspect, but we were able to look at how historically music is a fabric of the Black community. And so one of the students spoke about, we did cover, I did wanted to ask their opinion about gospel music. And one of them stated one of the main genre of music that played a role in African Americans was gospel music. Gospel music influenced them because it represented and addressed all types of religion, culture, and experience that African Americans endured during the Civil Rights Movement and the violent acts of racism. Gospel music also allowed people to have the knowledge of Christianity, giving them the hope and joy. Nonetheless, even white Americans decided you cannot color a sound. Music gave everyone a chance at inner peace. And so we looked at that, and then we also talked about, at the same time in Harlem, at this festival, the man is on the moon, right? But when the reporter was asking about the, should they be, is the landing of the moon important? And, you hear time and time again, many of them saying, well, that money could have been well spent in our neighborhoods. And that was, kind of the focal point of why this Harlem Festival was important, because just 2 years ago, Lyndon Johnson created the Corners Report, where they went around the United States of America to begin to ask what was really the issue in Black communities. And everybody resoundingly spoke about, we don't have jobs. And because we don't have jobs, our communities are being dilapidated. Our communities are being, so 69 is so pivotal, right? Because it's leaving one decade and about to approach a new decade, which is the 70s. And so here are, the 60s was the younger generation speaking out of all of the ills of America. And then you had all of those assassinations that came out in the 60s. And here the response is, well, what are we going to do as relates to going into the next decade, because they were looking forward. And so this festival really encapsulates all of what happened in the 60s and what was to come. And spoke about from the other panelists, you did now see the new shift because you had Stokely Carmichael and you had these young radical thoughts, and America wasn't. And so when you talk about Nina Simone, you know, were they ready? Not just the people there, but was America ready for what was to come that comes out of the 70s? And, you know, and how, you know, how culturally, economically, politically, and historically America was at this point. And so yeah, we talked about those things. And of course, I am going to go back and revisit again, because again, I said it was a lot earlier for my American history class. And I'm going to go back and we're going to revisit again and then have a more deeper discussion, because they'll have a better context once we begin. But I enjoyed showing it first, because now they can get a sense of kind of what the 60s was about.
Thank you, Professor Holloway. I think this is the last professor on the list, but we're going to have questions afterwards, right? So next professor is Dr. Pinkston at Norfolk State.
Warm greetings, everyone. I'm last but not least, okay? This is Dr. Christina Pinkston, Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia, one of the best HBCUs among the many. Yes, behold the green and gold. Isn't that right, my brother, Professor Derek? Okay, I teach English, literatures, public speaking at Norfolk State, and I had all 5 of my courses, all of my students, 100 plus, about 150 students to view Summer of Soul. I teach 2 African-American literature courses, 2 public speaking courses, and 1 freshman English course this semester. And I'm very proud. I'm giving a shout out to my students, many of whom are watching this Zoom. I'm proud of you. I'm making note, and thank you. I'll see you in class tomorrow. Okay, we had 2 questions that we addressed. One was about Operation Breadbasket and its impact on race relations with the private sector, Black businesses, corporate board, and boycotts. My students were reminded, some were reminded, and others learned that the Operation Breadbasket was initiated by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1962. And my students agreed, yes. The Operation Breadbasket did. I hear something. Is that me on echo or is somebody talking? Okay.
No, you're okay. There's no echo. You sound perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
My students agreed, yes, Operation Breadbasket did create new jobs. It did improve economic conditions in Black communities. It did encourage growth among Blacks in those communities. And it promoted buying Black and putting back into Black. They totally agreed that, yes, if the private sectors were too slow, if not at all, in doing their part to incorporate Blacks in their sectors and jobs and so forth, then yes, boycotts were absolutely necessary. Let our Black voice be heard. Now, when it comes to buying Black and putting back into Black, my students made clear that this is still going on today, and we did some research. Over 98 plus Black-owned clothing brands. Did you know that? There are 30 plus Black fashion designers. Did you know that? I mean, we should know this. 200 plus Black-owned businesses and 100 plus Black-owned restaurants throughout the United States. There should be more, but at least that's something. Some of the clothing brands that I looked up were Actively Black, Black Band Luxe Collection, and you should know about FUBU, For Us, By Us. They're even international now, selling in South Africa, China, Korea, and Saudi Arabia. Did you know that? Yes. We have Black Arts Festivals. I'm from Ohio. I'm a Buckeye, boo-boo. I'm a Buckeye. Okay, from the Ohio State University. And we have Black festivals and Black Arts Festivals. Black Arts Festivals, jazz festivals in Columbus, Ohio. Down here in Norfolk now, we have Black Arts Festivals, Black Jazz Festivals. And where you are, probably they are the same. So yes, the Operation Breadbasket initiative continues on today. And then our second question that we addressed was, just like Dr. Holloway so perfectly stated, thank you, Sweet Pea, you helped to get me started on what I want to say. You just set the stage, you did. Okay, putting a man on the moon, or should we have put that money into our U.S. communities? By a landslide, my students all said it should have gone into the communities. Not one person said that yes, we rightfully put it into man on the moon. And I loved in Summer of Soul, did you catch it? Did you catch it? It said the greedy versus the needy. Oh yes, if not, watch it again, okay? Although putting a man on the moon was a tremendous scientific accomplishment, those millions upon millions of dollars should have been invested in U.S. communities. And my students emphasized, number one, feed the hungry. Two, end poverty, or at least do your best to ease it significantly. Number three, stop the drug usage and especially stop piping it into Black communities. Number four, end homelessness, build shelters, train people to get back onto the job force, improve schools for everybody, but especially for people of color. Provide better training for police officers and enforce equal treatment towards citizens. We're still suffering brutality from many police officers today. I don't need to preach or talk about that, you know. My students also talked about creating far better health care, especially for those who are without insurance, and establish viable jobs. Students have emphasized, and I tend to agree, putting a man on the moon seemed to be celebrated mostly by Caucasians. Okay, gave them something to, woo, we did it. Okay, and we still have Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, who my students say should have done their part to solve ongoing problems rather than taking their joy rides into space. Hello. Okay, something that only the rich can afford. My students feel certain that nobody's trying to put Black people on the moon. Let me repeat that. Nobody's trying to put Black people on the moon. The country failed its citizens who had the greatest needs. And I love this student statement. Basic human rights are not profitable. So that's how I conclude what my students and I discussed. Thank you very much.
That's the mic drop.
Can I get an amen?
All right.
Love to have you in my classes. How are
amen.
You amen.
So now okay, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, do we have any questions submitted from the students? This is all great.
I have not seen any questions posted yet, only statements.
Yeah. And I hope everybody's looking at the statements. They're quite interesting too.
I believe there's one question. How does that transition over time remove us from our sources pre-slavery? How does that affect our self-identity, getting so far from our true history and who we were at the source before slavery? And we could probably break that up into two, beginning with how does that transition over time remove us from our source pre-slavery? Would any of our panelists like to take that question?
I'll take that question. What we all have to remember is as the African coming to a new society was stripped of its name and culture. However, in the midst of all of that, they were still able to take what was given to them and create something completely new, right? So for example, when you look at a group of people who you would think have no importance to the American culture, we can look at currently today, hip hop is a $1 trillion industry. That comes out of the struggle, what African Americans have always been through. And typically I always tell my students, you always gonna find the beauty in everything, because a butterfly is not beautiful in the beginning, it's a caterpillar, but it has to go through its metamorphosis. So I believe personally, we have never lost our identity. We just don't know where to connect it to. We've been so removed, or we have so many components that are affecting us. We never lost our identity because it's prevalent. We created two greatest genres of music in America ever, jazz and hip hop. So, and you can throw in blues and all of that as well, but I'm just talking about those two are pivotal in American history, not just Black American, but in American history. So I would say, to answer that question, I don't think we have ever lost who we are. I think we're always looking to what is the definition. And sometimes the problem is when you begin to look outside yourself, you'll be defined from the outside experience.
That was great.
Can I address that? Yeah, I think the assimilationist pull has been so strong. I remember when Malcolm X was killed, my father, veteran of 3 wars and proud African-American, he said, well, you know, he was a troublemaker. He was much more on the Martin Luther King pathway. And I think there were many people that were, the assimilationist pull has always just been so strong. And people were just, my dad was in the service for 45 years, and maybe not that long, but it was his career till a few years before he died. He said it was the only job available for a Black man. So I think he was a man of struggle and trying to fit in and trying to survive. And I think that's always been the pull for Blacks in America, to stand up and be mowed down, or to go ahead and get in where you fit in and do the best you can, to fit in without compromising, yourself. It's just evident. And then a breakthrough. I don't think the students recognize that moment, that breakthrough, as Charlene Hunter Galt, when she stood up to Abe, the publisher of the New York Times, I forget what his name is, but he's famous. And she said, no, change this Negro to Black, and was able to get that successfully effected right there. I don't think they have any import of the pressure it took for her to do that. And the 11-page letter that she wrote in order to make that point clear, that he who had the power, this Jewish guy, and I think that's also very important, this similar consciousness of oppression, that he heard her and was able to go ahead and say, feel the zeitgeist, feel the moment, the historical moment. And I think that's also very important. There's moments in history where there are breakthroughs made, and oftentimes allies help facilitate that process, because we cannot do this all alone. We're 13% of the population, and we absolutely need to convince older, younger, and generations, and allied groups as well. So that's my feeling on that.
Thank you for that feedback, Dr. Spears. Yeah, speaking of allied groups, I noticed that the Black Panthers were pretty prominent in one part of the film, and they assisted with security. So I wanted to ask some of the panelists what you thought about the perception of the Black Panther Party, because, you know, from the white perspective, they were radical. We wanted to just get rid of them, but we didn't really see in that film that the Blacks felt the same way. They relied on them to keep law and order, and actually didn't want to have the police around because they were afraid that the police would come in and do something they weren't supposed to do, as they usually did.
In brief, social media, or should I say the media period, gives Black people a bad rap.
Yeah.
The Black Panthers, which was established in 1968 in Oakland, California, it was originally set to help, create, to feed breakfasts to people and to take care of people in the community. But the way the Black Panthers were portrayed, dressed in all black, guns, rifles in hand, and hearing the radical speeches, or what they called, what white folks called radical speeches of Eldridge Cleaver. Man, I teach this, but my brain, I'm tired. I have another meeting in a few minutes. I'm going to have to log out soon. But the bottom line is the media has then and still to this day given us a negative voice. And no, I do not believe at all that you'll see anywhere in Summer Soul, I didn't, any fright, any fear, any negatives of the Black Panthers. If that were the case, why were people all over the country joining Black Panther chapters? Teenagers included. I say no more.
Well, thank you for everybody's feedback. And I just want to move on to what we're going to do. I'm going to have a couple of remarks, and then we're going to show a special Q&A that was done with Questlove. And this was from the company that distributed his film, Searchlight Pictures. And I could not find it anywhere else online. We had thought about chopping it up and just taking bits and pieces. And we said, well, why do that? We want to benefit from the full discussion. It's about 22 minutes. So I just wanted to let you know that that is coming up. I want to make some remarks first. I want to thank the students who are on this Zoom. I think that your discussion started in the classrooms, and I hope they will continue in your classrooms, because this discussion has been so rich and so informative. And I think that it has taken the level of understanding of the film to a whole different place. And I hope that you will maybe even go back and look at it again and share it with your friends and recommend it to your friends as well. I want to thank the professors. I want to thank from Cheney, Dr. Madsen wasn't able to join us, but Dr. Spears, thank you for coming. From Coppin State, I want to thank Dr. Hyatt. Thank you for coming. Delaware State, Professor Holloway and Professor Denson. Thank you so much. From Hampton, I want to thank Dr. Balls. From University of Maryland Eastern Shore, thank you, Dr. Gooden, for coming. From Norfolk State, Dr. Pinston, Dr. Lanois, thank you. From Simmons College of Kentucky, Professor Baskin, thank you so much. And I also want to give a special thank you to Dr. Keith Mellinger, who's at Morgan State University. They have a great program there. We've had a lot of discussions about wonderful things they're doing there. He actually put me in contact with Professor Moore, who served as facilitator. And Professor Moore, I want to thank you too. And Mr. Landis Osborne, who's been the puppeteer behind all the technology that's going on as a Zoom administrator. Thank you very much for what you've done. And last but not least, the HBCU committee and Links Incorporated, for all you've done to bring this forward. So I also want to say that we want to try to make this an annual event. And it has been my joy and pleasure to work with all of you professors in embracing this program and introducing this into your classrooms. So we all agree that this medium just is a wonderful conduit to talking about the voices and education and all of that for for us and our students. So I hope that you will continue to embrace films that the Essex County chapter, the Links, will bring forward to you, and maybe consider adding it into a small part of your curriculum, something to consider. But lastly, I want to say that there's an evaluation once this is done. It's not a long evaluation. It's for the professors and for the students, but just to get your feedback to see if we can make this even better. So if you can take just a minute or two to look at the evaluation. And Landis, can you bring up the contest screen share? Okay, so I put a little teaser out there for the students that we do have a contest. And this contest is going to be a creative short essay of no more than 2 pages, inspired by Summer of Soul. And I know we're going to get some great submissions based on what's in the chat function so far. These young people are very articulate, very clued into our history. So we're going to follow up with the nuances and the submission specifications in the next couple of days. And I would love to send it to the professors, and all you have to do is share it with your students. It's going to have all that they need, how they submit the file, the timing and all, but there is money involved. We will have a winner who will receive $400. We'll have a runner-up, $200, and a contender for $100. So who doesn't want to have some money? The dates, it will start on October 4th until the end of October. It will be past everybody's homecoming. So hopefully this will fit into the schedules, and winners will be announced in November. So do I have any questions about that? We're really excited to spur creativity and thought with our students, with your students. So I hope that they will embrace this and come forward with some short essays. All right, so that's all I wanted to say about that. And what we'll do now, if we don't have any other questions, is we're going to move into showing the Q&A with Questlove. You don't want to miss it. So I hope you'll stay on. And it is 22 minutes long. So hope you can stay, but if not, I understand. Enjoy.
Hi, Amir. I'm Lola Adeshoye, and I'm here talking to you about your feature documentary, your directorial debut, The Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised.
Yeah, thank you.
I watched it. I loved it. It gave me joy and happiness, and I'm a big music fan, so I was like, oh my gosh, wow, how come I've never seen this before? So could you just tell me a bit about...
That's $1 million question.
Exactly. So how did the project come into being in the first place? How did you find out about it?
Well, you know, I'll say that the world was pretty much in the dark. I had unknowingly seen footage of it back in 1997 when I was in Japan, like a minute of it. I was at a restaurant and saw a clip of Sly and the Family Stone, but it was like a bird's eye view, so I couldn't see the faces in the audience. So in my mind, I thought I was watching like them at a European festival, because I knew, like, at least in the late 60s, festivals, like now America is just catching on to the idea of festivals, whereas, you know, Europe has been doing this forever. Like, it's normal to them. So when I saw it, I just thought, like, oh, that must be Montreux Jazz Festival or something. So I never paid attention. So 20 years later, these two gentlemen, David Dennerstein and Robert Fivolent, called my people up and asked for a meeting to see if I'm interested in this, like, mythical festival that had, like, Sly and the Family Stone and Stevie Wonder, whatnot. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, I was, like, highly cynical. I was like, I know everything about music, and then I never heard about this thing in my life. And so when they came with the footage, though, I was gobsmacked. I was like, wow, like, how come I don't know about, if I don't know about this, I know the world doesn't know about this. And I'm pretty much the guy that will collect anything. Like I've paid 5 figures for like someone's sound check or something like that. Like that's the type of collector I am. And so, so suddenly it escalated quickly from just being my directorial debut to me restoring history.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely that's how I felt when I saw it. I mean, this is an important piece of historical footage that the whole world should know about. I mean, I've never seen anything of that scale, actually, especially, you know, a Black music event.
Yeah, it was the first of its kind. And what I'll say is that, you know, I know that we're just getting to the place now where the world is starting to listen to Black voices and really take us seriously, and not in that performative, you know, here's a little hors d'oeuvre thing, like just, you know, be happy with this morsel that we're giving you, but in a real way. And the thing is that, you know, with a lot of the content that's coming out lately, and telling our stories and telling our truth, you know, a lot of our story is sort of covered and riddled with pain, if you will. But, you know, there's another component of our story that really doesn't get focused on, and that's Black joy.
Yes. So
what I'll say is that at the time when I was making this film, I was I finally broke down and read Prince's autobiography, and he tells the story about him and his father when he was 11 going to see the Woodstock movie, and how that was the moment that changed his life. And that's the moment that set his direction in terms of, this is what I want to do for a living. Like Prince saw Woodstock at 11 and was like, I'm going to be that when I get older. And so, you know, I tend to wonder, like, because this film has been sitting in the basement for 50 years and denied, and they were trying to sell it like it was the Black Woodstock. Like up until the last minute, we called it Black Woodstock. And, you know, I just wonder, like, the millions of people out there, like, this could have also changed our lives as well, because, you know, Woodstock, the movie, has defined what the 60s meant in America. You know, that one film captured a moment and became a defining moment. And this could have been that for us. But, you know, it's 50 years out the gate. And, you know, I still think that it's powerful enough to be taken in and probably have a deeper ripple effect. Like, it's almost like it's timely. Now's the time for it.
Yeah, extremely timely. And exactly what you're saying about telling Black stories. You know, what I loved was seeing the kids and the moms and the dads and the families, and everyone looked fly and people were just having a good time. And it wasn't pain and suffering, because also if you think about the 60s, what we think of, obviously, civil rights from the marching and the protests, this other sort of cultural side of it, in the way that it is in this documentary, is something that I think is supremely inspiring. And definitely timely. And one thing I want to ask you, in terms of when you saw this footage, like, what kind of condition was it in? Like, what did you have to do to even make it into the documentary that it is now?
Okay, so once there were like at least, I believe, 30 boxes of tapes. And these tapes are ancient. You know, these tapes are 2 inches big and they weigh about 17 pounds each.
Wow.
So, yeah, just a whole one was like taxing to bring it from one room to another room. There's a restoration storage. There's only 5 of them left in the United States. 5 people that have the know-how and the education to how to take the film, bake it, because you can't just pop it in the video. It hasn't been run for 50 years. So, you know, the years of like, it could have eroded, it could have snapped in half, it could have been destroyed. So basically, we found the right restoration storage, and it took them 5 months to basically transfer to clean off and transfer the film to digital. In the meantime, you know, in the years, I think for at least 7 or 8 years, the original producer, Hal Tolchin, was trying to sell this, film from like between 69 to, I think he gave up around 75, 76. So he had already made a copy of the footage, and that's been like on VHS and throughout the years, whatever. So I basically took that footage and made pretty much a 24-hour loop of it. So because it's a lot to take in 40 plus hours of performance footage, and to pay attention to each scene and figure out what to put in. So for those 5 months while we were waiting for the film to be processed, every television in the house, in my office, in my bathroom, at my work, at my studio, I had a master hard drive at home, just basically playing this on 24-hour loop. Even when I was asleep, wake up, see something, oh, that's interesting, take notes. So for half a year, I just kept this on constant loop. And if I saw something interesting, I made a note of it. And then when I felt that I had at least enough compelling performance footage, then we started to craft the story around it. But it's really not until we started interviewing the attendees and the artist of the movie that the story really started to unfurl. So even what I had planned in the beginning kind of went out the window, because once they would open a door, then we walk through that door and investigate another story, and then go on and go on and go on from there. Like I didn't know that there was that much disdain from Black people about the moon landing. I didn't realize that until I heard like a few boos in the audience when Stevie Wonder announced, like, the man's on the moon right now, y'all, and that sort of thing. People were booing. I was like, huh? And then we found the news footage of, so it's like, it's almost like the footage told the story, and I was just the conduit and filtered it for you guys.
And so how did you find the attendees? Because I was really surprised to see, these people who've been there as kids, like in that.
You were surprised. You know what? We were trying to think of the most effective way to do it. And, this was the one time I got to flex my social media muscles for my occupation. Because normally, when I post on social media, it's like music trivia or, something silly like cereal. So I simply put a tweet out and was like, look, is there that figure in your life that's been talking about some mythical concert that you never believed that happened in Harlem? Like, what's like? Because it's just to look at the names alone.
I know.
And you're like, wait, no one knows about this? How does no one know about this?
That was a mega concert. Like
300,000 people seen it. Right. And so I was just like, look, do you have a crazy uncle that's always telling you this story all your life about this concert? Can you find that person? And sure enough, everyone's like, yes, I know someone that, and then once we got about 20 people, and the thing was, it's like, it's 50 years later. So you're running the risk of, there was the sweet spot for us was anybody that was like between 14 and 20 that was there, because now they would be 70 and have some sort of memory about it. I met some people that were there that were like maybe 25 at the time, and they're 80 something now. And they're like, man, that was a lot of weed ago. I don't remember that, And what's weird is that our first attendee, Musa Jackson, at first I was a little skeptical, because he was like, I was 5 years old, and I was like, nah, you don't like, what insight would a 5-year-old have of this thing? Like, you just want to play with your friends. But he convinced us. He's like, look, this was my very first memory in life. And so kind of because it was our first interview, we decided to just interview him cold, without showing him any footage, without showing him any context, just to see what he brought to the table. And he literally, like, we were mind blown, like, wow, this really was your first memory. So it just so happened that we had the footage that he was speaking of. And the second he saw that, man, like, tears just started welling up. And then I knew, oh, wow, like, we just gave somebody their life back, their memories. Because as you get older, you start having faith, like, did that really happen? No, I swear nobody believed him that he went to this concert, because he's so young. Like, that never happened. I'm from Harlem. I lived here all my life. That I never heard such a concert, like that sort of thing. And just to watch, it was like, you believed in Santa Claus all your life and nobody believed you. And finally, like, someone came and validated it. So that's what it was like. So
yeah, that's amazing. Because I remember at a point he said, you know, I'm not crazy, and like I'm glad to see this is actually finally, you know, I can see it for myself once again. He probably thought it was a dream that he'd been having.
He definitely thought it was a dream, and just to see him get his memory back, like that changed his life, and I'm so glad that we got a moment to do that.
And why do you think no one cared? Like, even if you were not for Black people, this was an amazing concert. I mean, why didn't anyone care to want to show it?
You know, the Roots released an album in '99 called Things Fall Apart, and there's a quote at the beginning of our intro that says that, you know, at the end of the day, hip hop culture is treated as if it was disposable. It's not even treated as art. And, you know, I realized that is even more than just hip hop. That's almost like, you know, this is why we scream Black Lives Matter. This is a prime example of it, because it would just be like, big deal. Okay, so you had a concert with some big acts. Like, it was no big deal. But no, it's like, dude, the way, again, nobody at Woodstock was a household name. But yet, when this movie came out, history was rewritten, and now all of a sudden it's the most important central part of our lives. And that could have been us. Actually, what wound up being that for Black people, especially in the United States, was the show Soul Train. That was the very first kind of view of Black joy that the world got to see, a Black joy, where Black teenagers weren't mired in violence and civil rights and being thrown in jail and being in trouble. And so it's, you know, we're seeing that battle now, even with like content creators on TikTok, like people not getting proper credit for their contributions to society. Like, our slang gets used, our music gets used, our style gets used. Like, we contribute a lot. And the thing is that if you don't acknowledge that, then you just tend to take stories for granted and creators for granted. And for all too often, like, Black creators in any form, be it entertainment, sports, politics, in everyday life, don't get the proper due respect for our contributions to this country. And then, you know, you're going to have a new generation that just thinks that nothing happened. Like, you know, like, oh, what did you guys do? And so it's like, you know, Black erasure is real. And that's why I really felt that it was doubly important to really get this film right, so that people can see indeed that, yes, our lives and contributions and culture does matter.
Well, you have to also think that if that sort of thing has been hidden for so long, what else is there?
Yo, I'm gonna tell you right now. In lieu of doing this film, I've been in contact with like 4 separate entities that have revealed to me other mind-blowing, staggering events that have been sitting in the basement forever. So I feel like this is now going to unearth, like right now my DMs are full of, hey, I don't know if you know about this, but in 1972, this concert happened in front of 90,000 people, and we have it on 35 millimeter too, and we don't know what to do with the footage. So it's almost like I get the feeling that this is going to start a floodgate of creative Black stories that I didn't know I had any. You know, like I never had any lofty goals to be a director, but you know, when the pandemic came, but you know, I got this before the pandemic, but you know, all of us had a mission, or heed to a call to pivot and find other ways of creativity for the year that we had off. For those that did the work, we got to discover some superpower that we never knew that we had. And so I kind of went into this thing like, am I? And now I'm in this thing like I am. So I guess I'm a storyteller now, you know?
Well, you know what? I think for something like this or other projects, you need someone that's a nerd, right? You need someone that can sit down, that wants to go through, I mean, I didn't know that Stevie Wonder played the drums. Am I like totally missing that? Like,
that is exactly why it's the first scene. Like, and I'm a drummer. Yes, I knew he was a drummer, you know, because he played on all of his albums in the 70s. But we never see that side of Stevie Wonder. And so, you know, when I saw that scene, I immediately knew, oh, wow, everybody's going to be mind blown when they seen this. This got to be the first scene. You know, I wanted something that was instantly booyaka, like hits you. And that was the scene. The day I finally seen that scene, and again, like I'm going through 40 hours of footage and it's just random. You know, I was getting ready for work one day. I wasn't even getting ready for work. I was like leaving for the airport at 4 a.m. Scene happened to be on as I was rushing out the door, and I took a note like, oh my God, what is this? So yeah, it's who knew? But I'm now the world knows. Now the world knows.
And also big up to the promoter, because I've done events. To put on an event like that over a period of time, for it to be so seamless, no trouble with acts of that size. That's another side of Blackness that we don't see. Just that organization.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. You know, it's weird. My favorite part of this whole journey was going through all the paperwork. And because that's the thing, like the first thing I was interested in was probably the factoids that the average person wouldn't be interested in, only because I've been a touring musician for 20 years. So, and I've been through every aspect of it. Like the Roots had to stay in these seedy, horrible motels in the south of France, like 4-tour room, arguing over a pillow. You get the pillow, you get the comforter, I get the mattress, like that sort of thing. And now, like, we're like, that's not my suite, you know, 20 years later. But, you know, and all stops in between. So I wanted to know things like, was there a such thing as a rider? You know, what were transportation? Was the transportation method like back then? Just like even the sound tech, looking at the soundboards, even what they were paid, man, I did not know. Like, who knew that you could get Sly and the Family Stone? The price they paid Sly and the Family Stone is like what I don't even pay like the opening acts that DJ for me. Like, who knew you can get Sly and the Family Stone for $2,500 back in 1969? So I think mainly it was because you know, that show was more like a rehearsal for them. It was like a last minute addition. So they did it for $2,500. But yeah, man, like there's so much that I learned just about the organization and also just the audacity. Like for me, for the person that conceptualized it, who was the host, Tony Lawrence.
Yes.
This is what I really want people to walk away with. Because I had to learn this lesson making this film. Like, he had the audacity to dream. And, you know, a lot of times we have this voice in our head that tells us, oh man, it's going to be exhausting. And I got to rob Peter to pay Paul and hustle this and hustle that and make sure that transportation's straight and da-da-da-da. But he had a vision, and he made other people see it. And that, to me, manifestation is what I want people to learn. That lesson that I want us to learn for the last year of how things can happen if you really put your mind in a place where you see it through. And that's the most important thing, you know, because oftentimes we have the voices of doubt in our head that we can't do this. And so, you know, as I was doing this, you know, it also helped me too, because, you know, Lord knows I was afraid every step of the way that, you know, I might be imposter syndrome. Like, well, he's never directed a film before and da-da-da. How can he do this? And, you know, Tony Lawrence, the conceptualizer of this, like, he was going through the same thing and he did it. So that to me is like the big lesson I want people to walk away with.
Thank you, because that was actually going to be my last question, which is, what would you want people to take away? And you answered it perfectly.
Thank you.
No, manifestation, dream big, be audacious. You know, don't let anything, those voices in your head or even other people's voices stop you.
We say things to ourselves that we would never allow other people to say to us. You know, if the very things you say to yourself, if your best friend said that thing to you, you look fat in that, or ill, like you can't do that. You'd be ready to fight. And it's almost like you got to do that to your own voice. You got to squash that voice in your head. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been fascinating to listen to you, and I love just love the documentary so much, and I know that the world will as well.
Thank you, Lola. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, all. So was that awesome or was that awesome? Hearing it straight from Questlove. Just so insightful.
Ooh, awesome, totally.
Yeah, really. And it was just so interesting hearing how the film was made and the obstacles he had to deal with, even to get it in a physical condition to even look at the film. So just really incredible insight and great advice toward the end. Great advice. So before we conclude, we have 4 minutes left or so. Any other comments anybody wants to make? Well, so much has been said tonight. So I thank everyone once again. It was my pleasure to work with all of you and to host you tonight. And I just thanked a ton of people already. So until next year, I will be in contact soon about our next film. So thank you again and good night to everybody.
Thank you, Tammy. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.